Hey, this is Meech back again. This is part two. Okay, so I promise I'm gonna talk a little faster, so I won't take up all y'all time. So, fast forward to the induction part. So, they keep me, overnight. I was like the last person to close down the clinic. I'm still in the clinic until about like almost 7 o'clock that evening, with the nurse and the janitor, the custodian that was cleaning up. So they labor and delivery was full. So they're trying to find a room, scurry to find me a room. Then I go up to triage and I'm standing there at the counter waiting for them to give me a room ready. Then they take me to a room in which they prepare for the induction piece, but it's not necessarily the labor and delivery room. I think it's like an antepartum room that they had available. And so they prep me, and then later on that morning, probably about maybe I want to say 4 or 5 that morning, then they finally transferred me. I walked up to labor and delivery, or did they push me in a wheelchair? They may have. I think I walked though. So I went to labor and delivery, and then they finally got the things going. Now, they started the Pitocin, which is not my friend. And anybody who's talked to me, who's heard my previous birth experiences, I've told them that Pitocin is like Satan in a bag because the contractions are real. They are really magnified. I was doing great with the natural contractions, breathing them out, doing what I need to do, bouncing on the ball, I'm doing jumping jacks, squats, lunges, like working it out. And once they put that Pitocin on, it just like turns you into a different person. So she was cranking it up, cranking it up. By this time, my mom was in the waiting room with the kids. She had got there. They had got donuts or whatever. And this is later on, like in the morning time. So it's probably around like 10:30, I want to say, or 11 o'clock. And so the nurse is cranking it up, and then she cranked it up to 6. Now I remember, being the nurse, I'm always kind of observant and watching things. And my previous deliveries, like anytime they cranked it up to 6, oh yeah, it was hammer time, baby. Like them contractions was like somebody punching you, and then you get a one breather, and then they keep punching your stomach over and over again. It's like no break. And so at that point, I just like turned into like somebody else. I'm like, I can't take 6. Crank it up to 6. I need an epidural. And so the nurse is like, oh, you're doing so good. I'm like, well, not when you turn it up to 6. Like I was like upset, out of character, like for me. And so she was like, okay, well, I can get somebody to get the anesthesiologist to come in and get you started on the epidural. And so I'm like, okay, in the meantime, can I take a shower? So we wrapped my IV up, and I said, I don't even have to like I have to wash up in the shower. I just want to just be in there just to kind of get some relief and get some water on me. And so Micah sends me in the shower, just helps me to get in there. And I'm like barely in there, but the water's kind of pouring on my back. And then the contractions are like coming like crazy and like really intense. And so one of them came, and I'm like, whoa, I feel a lot of pressure. Oh my goodness. And then boom, like the my water breaks, which I had never experienced. Naturally, they've always had to pop my water, with the nurse would have to probe it, because I would have the epidural by that time. So my water breaks, and I'm like, oh shoot, my water's broken. And he's just like grossed out, like, okay, but it's like in the shower, so of course it blends in with the shower. But he just like saw that big bag. I was like a water balloon had popped. And so after that, I'm like, okay, let me give me one more minute, and I'm trying to get out. But every time I tried to take a step out of the shower, it was like the contractions like taking over. Like I couldn't even move. They were just so intense. And so we finally got out, and I said, all right, let me take a step, let me breathe, and then contraction again. And then I took like 2 more steps to the bed. I had to pause, let that contraction go out. And then the nurse was like, well, let me check you since you're like so much pain and your water broke. And so she checked me, and supposedly I was like 6 to 7 centimeters. And I was like, no, I don't believe it. And then 2 minutes later, I'm like screaming my head off, like grabbing the back of the mattress, like, oh, shoot, it's about to come out. It's so much pressure. Mike's over in the corner laughing, sadly, while I'm like screaming out. He said I was saying something crazy. And then the nurse was like, well, let me check you again. And she goes to check me, and she's like, oh, yeah, you're complete. I'm like, yeah, I knew I was complete like 2 minutes before the last time you checked me. And so they get everything together. and prepare for delivery. Unfortunately, my regular OB doctor didn't have a chance to make it. That 20-minute transit got her. So I had another doctor that came in and delivered me. And probably within like 3 pushes, Miles was out. So they have like a little process to where they, give you an hour of like bonding time. So Miles is like laying on my chest, doing that skin to skin contact. Then began, as far as like the nursing. And then after that, comes the postpartum time. So fast forward to, I'm going to leave out some details, but fast forward to when they tried to check my uterus. Every time they would press down on it, like large clots would come out, like golf ball to like softball size clots. So they press it and they're like, oh, it's not firming up. So they had to give me yet another bag of Pitocin. And then they had and then I had just like one small skin tear, they said. So of course they had to put one suture in that. But she was like, yeah, one suture, 1 or 2 sutures is fine. Like it's not like a big deal. And then it still wasn't clotting, so they hung something, and I want to say it's like TX8 or something. I can't recall what the name of it was, but I was like, something else. So anywho, and then she tried to like manually retrieve the clots, which was absolutely painful, and I don't want to get into that because I have like some type of PTSD with that. It's very traumatic for me. But after that, then they finally took me to the postpartum area, and yeah. So the weird part about it though was that postpartum for this hospital, like, it's not really a nursery for real. And I'm getting charged like a nursery fee, which is crazy. But it's like, no, the baby doesn't go to the nursery. The baby stays with you pretty much the whole time, like overnight. They have you leave the side light on next to you where the little bassinet is. And they're like, yeah, so you can keep an eye on him, and make sure that he's doing all right. Me? Aren't I supposed to be trying to get some rest? Like at least a 2 hours. I know it's my kid and all, but I'm like, well, I could be home like doing this. Gee whiz. So I absolutely got no sleep that night because I was like, well, I gotta watch him if he in here and the lights on. I can't go to sleep with that bright light in my face. So, and then of course, like he was wanting to feed like every 2 hours, and then they had you write down how much, or if you were pumping, how much he fed, or when the last time he fed. Also, how many wet diapers he did, and how many dirty stool diapers that he had. So I'm like, I feel like I'm like at school right now. I got to take a log. I'm on a shift. So by that time, like Mike and I were exhausted, and per what I read, they let moms who delivered vaginally deliver within 24 hours. So we were just kind of banking on leaving like that day. We didn't even get a chance to have like the celebratory dinner that they have. So, he received his circumcision, the baby did, and that was like pretty much the only time that they had took him away to the nursery, and they also did like a repeat hearing test with him up there too. So he was gone no more than like 2 hours, I would say, at the max, away from me. And so after that, it was, let's see, that later on that morning, let's see, we ate breakfast, and then he had his test done. Let them know my documentation, and then pretty much they like let me go home. Like, which was odd. He didn't even take any baby pictures in the hospital, like none of that. So, but we were so ready to go because right before we left, a couple hours that morning, and I was trying to like pump. People kept coming to my door, like weird visitors for like other families, just coming to my door, opening the door up, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I must have the wrong room," and it happened 3 times. And so by that time, like Mike is like fed up. Like we, the next time the nurse came in, we're like, look, can you put like a do not disturb sign or something on the door? Because we've had three strangers come to our door and three sets of people come to our door that have not been our visitors. And apparently somebody had like a similar last name to me or something. So I guess the front desk was like routing them to my room. And I'm like, well, how are you supposed to be comfortable and you guys encourage breastfeeding and breast pumping and you don't provide the privacy and the facility to do so, like the comfort level? So by that time we're like, look, we're ready to go. So we ended up heading home, and things were going pretty decent for a little while, as far as me and Miles goes. But I'm gonna save you some time, so in the next video I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my postpartum time. All right, peace out.